West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
A new filing from Donald Trump in the Mar-a-Lago documents case in front of Judge Eileen Cannon. He filed what he's calling a motion to compel discovery. And in it, he's basically saying, yes, you've given me millions of pages of voluminous discovery. There's so much to go through, but I want more, right? I didn't get enough. There's more stuff that I want. And really, what's in this 68-page document that I thought was most interesting is buried in there on page 41 is he has a new defense in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. He is no longer going to claim all the things he's been claiming before. His defense now in the Mar-a-Lago case is, number one, he still had a security clearance, that it was not terminated. And number two, Mar-a-Lago and his other residents, whether it's Bedminster or Trump Tower or whatever, but Mar-a-Lago in particular, where these documents were found, used to be a temporary skiff. Because when he was president, he would often do work in different places. And remember, a skiff is a secure facility that you can view classified documents in. And these skiffs are very, very secure. They don't allow anyone, like, let's say, first of all, you're not supposed to bring your phone or any electronic devices in there because those could be hacked into and it could compromise national security information. They're soundproof. They're also, they are, the real secure skiffs won't allow signals to come in so that there can be any of this hacking. And it's very, very controlled about who can go in and who can't. And there are permanent skiffs, but then there's temporary skiffs. And Mar-a-Lago was a temporary skiff, according to this motion, which makes sense. So now his defense is going to be, he could possess those things at Mar-a-Lago. They were secure, right? And so he had a security clearance. He could still possess them. And he could possess them at Mar-a-Lago because it was a temporary skiff. So that's going to be his new defense, or at least that's the one he's test driving now. And in this motion, he basically says a couple of things. He's saying that Jack Smith is withholding lots of information from him because he thinks that because you have to coordinate with a lot of different agencies, because you're the former president, whether it's Secret Service, the FBI, whether it's the CIA, etc. There's lots and lots of agencies that you had to coordinate with in this investigation. He's saying, therefore, they're part of the prosecution team. So I want all their documents too. I want every file, every document, anything that's ever mentioned Donald Trump or this investigation. I mean, he's really, really trying to expand the prosecution team, is what they're calling it, beyond the actual prosecution team and making Jack Smith responsible for obtaining records and documents from other agencies that might not actually be part of the team and that he might not have control over. This motion is interesting, though, because the tone of it is very different than everywhere else, where Trump goes after the judges, goes after judges' law secretary, and calls everyone just that it's politically motivated, it's a witch hunt, deranged, you name it, right? The way he goes after judges. And here, because it's Judge Cannon, who he appointed and who rules in his favor every time she can, the tone is very different. And it's President Trump respectfully submits, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You know, he knows how to treat the court, and he only does it and sucks up to the judge that he thinks he can control. And so far, she's been allowing him, she's been bearing that out. But he submits this motion, and along with a classified supplement. Most of the stuff in there is redacted, so it was hard to read because a lot of it was redacted in order to file it publicly. But it was But what I could glean from it was basically to compel Jack Smith to produce more materials. But he also accuses Jack Smith of disregarding his discovery obligations, Department of Justice policies. He's supporting the Biden administration and his effort to weaponize the DOJ. I mean, on and on and on, attacking him. And he says that basically what illustrates the absurdity of this is that while working toward a historic landslide victory in Iowa yesterday, Trump was also had to prepare to bring to the court's attention the record of misrepresentations and discovery violations that have marred this case from the outset. So he's basically saying, he's complaining that because that he has to be interrupted in his landslide victory, that he has to deal with this and make these arguments. And he said, look, there were Freedom of Information Act releases from the Department of Justice, which is basically the statute that allows anyone, the media or you and me or anyone, to make requests of the Department of Justice, the National Archives, or frankly, any government agency, state or federal. In New York, it's called FOIL, the Freedom of Information Law. Federal, it's FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. But either way, you make a request. And because government works for the public, everything's public. So there's certain exceptions and carve-outs that of things that don't get released. But by and large, public records have to be released. And so there were 22 such releases from the Department of Justice and the National Archives. And Trump said that these FOIA releases show that the crusade against Trump began in 2021. However, the items that were disclosed in the FOIA disclosures that show that there was a close participation between the investigation and the National Archives and the Biden administration, so people such as the White House counsel's office, etc. We weren't given this information, right? And so he's complaining that there's information there that he didn't get. He's also saying that the Biden administration leaked stuff to the New York Times and that he didn't get that information. He says that from the FOIA disclosure that there was stuff about the Attorney General, that he personally approved the raid at Mar-a-Lago. But he says, look, all of this was redacted when it was turned over, and he wants it unredacted. He doesn't like that he got redacted. He wants all of the information in there. This is a motion, though, not just from Donald Trump, by the way. This is also a joint motion by Carlos de Oliveira and Waltine Nauta, the two other co-defendants. By the way, neither of them had security clearance, so there's no reason they should get half the stuff that is being asked for sure. But anyway, he's basically claiming that there was exculpatory and discoverable evidence in the hands of all these other people, the White House and the intelligence community, and just all these other agencies, and that it was the special counsel's obligation to produce this, calling it exculpatory material. Well, the one thing I can tell you Jack Smith knows is his Brady obligations, right? Brady is the case that stands for the proposition that anything that tends to be exculpatory to the defendant, and the prosecutor's not allowed to make that call. It's really would the defendant think that it's helpful or exculpatory, has to be turned over. That's it. And of course, Jack Smith knows his Brady obligations. And so anything that is Brady, he will have turned over. But Trump is complaining, saying Jack Smith is not turning it over, that everything's heavily redacted, that has a much more narrow, that Smith has a narrow definition of what a prosecution team is, but there shows that there's extensive cooperation between agencies. And he's trying to make it so that Jack Smith has to get stuff that's maybe not in his control, but the sheer volume of is also, and it's irrelevant to the case, but that the sheer volume would make it almost impossible. But this is what this case is about. And there's legal arguments about what's in the control of the prosecutor, who's the prosecution team, and what the law requires. And we'll see what Judge Cannon rules. I think because she tends to want to rule in Trump's favor, who knows what she'll do and whether she'll expand the prosecution team and the scope of what Jack Smith has control over and can obtain. And we'll see whether he's required to turn over unredacted documents and unredacted information. Again, if he has these, if this is national defense information, whether or not he had a security clearance or still does, it's still a need to know. You still don't have to turn that over or put it out there. Certainly not to the two defendants who don't have that. And so I think this is, in any other courtroom, this would be a red herring, but because it's in front of Judge Cannon, who knows what she will rule. But that's the latest filing, and that's his latest defense. He's going to say, I had security clearance, and so I was able to possess these, and Mar-a-Lago was a SCIF, so that was not inappropriate or unsafe to have it there. Jack Smith will shoot that down in 2 seconds, because even if he still did have security clearance, you're not entitled to keep those records. And P.S., you were not charged with possessing classified documents. You're charged with possessing national defense information. And look, even if it was, you can't be charged for having taken them because you had a good faith basis thinking you could keep them and possess them. The minute they asked you for them, the minute it was subpoenaed, and you lied about whether you had them, lied about turning them over, had your lawyers sign an affidavit that you looked diligently everywhere and found everything there is, knowing that there wasn't, right? That's all obstruction of justice. At that point, you did know you couldn't possess it, and you still did. You're in big trouble, buddy. So Judge Cannon better do the right thing and not do Trump's bidding here. I'm Karen Friedman-Agnifilo with Legal AF.
It is Thursday, the 18th of January of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special. Yes, that's right, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. It's been a few days, well, at least a couple, since we last were in the salon. Didn't have a power outage, but we did have an act of God nonetheless. And you know, of course, that in the digital realm, an act of God is whatever the ISP does or has happened to them. So, beyond our control and even reason. So, just saying. The word is that yesterday's outage here in the Southern Oregon area, apparently they didn't have as many internet outages on the rest of the West Coast as they did on Tuesday. That was, in some cases, a nationwide phenomena. But nonetheless, yesterday's outage, apparently, according to Spectrum, was done because of vandalism. And you know who's getting blamed for it here in Southern Oregon? Yeah, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, because there's so many of them here. And because there's not that many, they are the ones that would be doing this. Disregarding the fact that power stations, cable stations, forestry lookouts, supply areas for the forestry department, are routinely ransacked and vandalized by right-wing militia types because they get them on camera. You know, the little ring camera type thing, security thing that people have everywhere now, Big Brother. Thank God, I guess, in some cases. And it always turns out to be these right-wing idiots or, you know, Nazi meth heads. Got a lot of those. Yeah, we keep hearing about fentanyl coming over the border. You know, the fentanyl manufacturing here in Southern Oregon is done by Proud Boy Nazis. So who are you going to expect to get blamed? Yeah, the illegals. And whoever is brown is an illegal by, you know, just by the way they look. Look at them. And we are the racist ones. We are the bullies for bringing it up. I get that a lot. Point out people's inherent and incessant and latent, you know, at least bigotry. Oh, they cannot stand that. Now, I think what makes us more evolved, and yeah, I know that sounds like a little, you know, sort of, yeah, ethnocentric, I don't know. Regardless, those of us who have become more evolved tend to show the capacity to admit a mistake. And here in America, we apologize for it. I learned while traveling around the world that sometimes apologies are looked at as a sign of weakness. So I can get where Trump's getting his little thing about I'll never apologize for anything. That'll show that I'm weak. But if we are to take America as some sort of like pinnacle of the evolution of mankind into, you know, deciding for themselves how they'd like to go, you would think that evolving to the capacity to be self-reflective, admit a mistake, apologize for it, and try to be a better person would be lauded rather than denigrated as some sort of weakness. Oh, you want to be a better person? What's wrong with you, commie? So, yeah, I like to think that maybe that's where we're supposed to go with it. But elsewhere in the world, you know, I can see in a strategic way why maybe you might not want to admit a mistake. I can see. I don't accept. Because, I don't know. Better to say, yeah, you know what? I was wrong. Because otherwise you're crazy as a loon because you're going to keep making the same mistake over and over and over and convincing yourself that everything that you're doing is just hunky-dory. I have perfect immunity. Yep, that's where we are right now. We're going to discuss the constitutionality of a guy who says that he can do anything he wants anytime at all, and that's the way God wanted it because, I don't know, he's now accepted the mantle of Messiah. The people have spoken for so long, and now they're all saying, look, this representative democracy is not a representative democracy. It's a republic. And the people have chosen that they want the Messiah to lead them. You know who else adopted the mantle of Messiah after the people just kept saying it over and over and over? And he held off, too, for a bit of time, as any theatrical actor would do. Timing is everything. Yeah, Adolf. Yep. The good Germans, none of them were Nazis at the end of the war. Remember that. They were all just good Germans. I wasn't a Nazi. No. They wanted a Messiah to come and save their asses for whatever it was that they kept doing over and over and over. And I don't know what that was, but, you know, they didn't want to be good neighbors. Sometimes that's what happens. So here we are. We got a guy who says, oh, yeah, you can't call me a Nazi. I know, because you've gone beyond. It's a kind of like a Fifth Reich maybe already rather than even a fourth. We've already moved to the fifth. But I don't think he's going to get granted immunity by the Supreme Court because they're looking at that regulatory case, and that will give them power over all of us. We don't need, why have one dictator when you can have 6 as a panel? And they'll decide among themselves how they'll carve up whatever it is they don't want to call representative democracy anymore. Separation of powers, my ass. Judiciary is not supposed to be a policy-making branch of government. Activist judges. They kept saying activist judges, and a lot of us back in the day said, you know what? They are saying that they're activist judges, and they're going to take over everything. Look at them. The Federalist Society, Heritage, Americans for Prosperity. We got to stop them. People go, oh, you're just trying to say that they are the right's Soros. No, we're saying that would Soros give us some money, please? Gosh, drops a few coins in like a cause, and now he's running the world. But the Kochs and the Petersons and the DeVosses and the Mercers, et cetera, no, they're pillars of our community. No shit, Sherlock. There's some pretty strong pillars holding up the edifices there in Berlin, too. How'd they get there? Yeah, they had their Nazi billionaires. That's the way they were called, Nazi billionaires. Except I think they said millionaires because that was like an incomprehensible number. Now it's like trillionaires. What is that? I've had a few things pent up since we last spoken. Now I've let it out, but because the morning was so frantic, because, things happen, in real life, and sometimes they're because of animals, sometimes because you're caring for an elderly parent, or because you decided that you're going to set your headphones down and go close a closet door, and your foot goes through the cord of the headphone and pulls your coffee off the desk, and it spills over everything, including on your headphones. Thanks. So we had that happen just at the last minute. Anyway, what do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Trump concocted his dumbest defense yet in that Mar-a-Lago document case. The one where he stole secret documents and is going to sell them to everybody. He gave up some Israeli documents and now to the Russians. And now, Hamas is hitting a lot of different stuff. What the hell is that? And the Houthis, too. All right. Well, he's also begging his defense team judge to help him out. And she will, too. She's on the defense team. Let's be clear. On the rest of the menu, the Kansas court system needs at least $2.6 million in additional funds to recover from an October cyber attack. Yes, these offerings are from yesterday because we didn't do them because we weren't on the air, so we got to do them. Okay. Virginia Senate Democrats postponed work on constitutional amendments to devote more time to killing GOP voting suppression bills, and a federal judge declined to block Georgia's shortened runoff election period from 9 weeks down to 4. Yeah, you can do it in 4. With less places to vote to at also, just to be clear. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Russia's recent intense attacks on Ukraine have sharply increased civilian casualties in December. And a court in Cambodia convicted 4 activists of plotting to provoke a peasant revolution by teaching farmers about class divisions. Don't do that. Take the books away. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. We are going to tuck into this First offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy instead of doing the usuals at this usual point. So here we go. The Kansas court system needs at least $2.6 million in additional funds to recover from an October cyber attack that prevented the electronic filing of documents and blocked online access to records for weeks. And the state's top judicial official told legislatures on Tuesday. State Supreme Court Chief Justice Marla Luckert included the figure in a written statement ahead of her testimony before a joint meeting of the Kansas House and Senate Judiciary Committees. The Republican-controlled legislature must approve the funding, and Democratic Governor Laura Kelly must also sign off. Luckert's written statement said the courts needed the money not only to cover the cost of bringing multiple computer systems back online, but to pay vendors, improve cybersecurity, and hire 3 additional cybersecurity officials. She also said the price tag could rise. Well, it always does. The attack occurred on October 12th. Judicial branch officials have blamed a ransomware group based in Russia, saying it stole data and threatened to post it on a dark website if its demands were not met. Judicial branch officials have not spelled out the attackers' demands. However, they confirmed earlier this month that no ransom was paid after responding to an AP request for invoices since October 12th, which showed just as much. Luckert said little about the cost of the cyber attack during Tuesday's joint committee meeting and did not mention the $2.6 million figure. She and other judicial branch officials also met with the House committee in private for about 15 minutes to discuss more sensitive security issues. Sarah Rankin of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A Democratic-led Virginia Senate panel defeated on Tuesday a handful of Republican-sponsored voting bills and moved to put on hold consideration of several proposed constitutional amendments until after this year's session. Without discussion, the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee voted to carry over the proposed amendments, which had been unveiled with great fanfare after the November elections when Democrats held their Senate majority and flipped control of the House of Delegates. Gosh, we keep winning, don't we? Senate Democratic leader Scott Suravel said in a text message that the proposed amendments were being carried over until the 2025 session, something he characterized as standard practice, given that amendments are typically introduced in odd-numbered years. The move won't slow down the timeline by which voters could potentially consider the measures. Proposed constitutional amendments must first pass both chambers of the General Assembly in 2 years, with an intervening election for the House of Delegates in between. Those elections happen every 2 years in odd-numbered years, meaning the soonest they could be up for a vote is 2026. Amy of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A federal judge in Georgia has declined to block part of a sweeping election law that shortened the state's runoff election period to 4 weeks from 9 while legal challenges play out. U.S. District Judge J.P. Boulay ruled that plaintiffs had not proved that the shorter period disproportionately harmed black voters. Yeah, that's right. Or that Republican lawmakers intended to discriminate against black voters, because they can do it in their sleep. It's just like unconscious, okay? They didn't mean it, but it always happens. And he denied a request for a preliminary injunction, but the claims can still be litigated at trial, can they? Several voting advocacy and civil rights groups, as well as the U.S. Department of Justice, no relation that I know of, sued after Republican state lawmakers passed the measure less than 6 months after Trump narrowly lost the state and made false claims about widespread election fraud. Georgia has an unusual requirement for a runoff election when no candidate wins a majority in the general election. Most states declare the highest vote getter the winner, but no, not in good old boy country. This has meant multiple high-profile contests being settled after the normal November general election date in recent years. And that is not by accident. All right, let us get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Imagine for a moment that you're a very hungry bird soaring over 30-foot ocean swells and high winds with no land for thousands of miles. How do you know where you're going? Well, if you're a wandering albatross, you listen. According to a new finding in October's Proceedings of the National Association of Sciences USA, this seabird navigates using sounds below our thresholds for hearing. For Science Quickly, I'm Joseph Polidoro. The wandering albatross thrives in the circumpolar band of ocean north of Antarctica, a windswept region that the world's best sailors say has the most inhospitable seas on the planet. On the Southern Ocean's islands where they nest and brood, one wandering albatross parent tends the nest while its partner takes to the sea, traveling as much as 10,000 kilometers as it forages for scattered prey. The bird must eat enough to fuel its turn on the nest, which can be a long time.
Birds might go for perhaps a minimum of 4 or 5 days, right the way through to up to 30 days.
Samantha Patrick is a marine ecologist at the University of Liverpool in England and a co-author of the study. Wandering albatrosses actually gain weight on these long trips because they're extremely efficient flyers.
If you've seen an albatross, it almost never beats its wings. It's quite fascinating to see them flying in the wind. When they're flying, their heartbeat is the same as when they're resting.
That's Sophie de Grissac, an ornithologist and a researcher at the French National Museum of Natural History in Paris, who wasn't involved in the study. With their long wingspan, the longest of any bird, maxing out at 12 feet, wandering albatrosses use wind, air pressure gradients, and gravity above the swells and waves to soar for thousands of miles, reaching top speeds of 45 miles an hour. Basically, wandering albatrosses don't fly, they soar.
And the more distance you cover, the more you may find food.
The wandering albatross's keen senses of sight and smell help it locate prey. But these senses are good for about 100 kilometers, a distance the bird can travel in as little as an hour and a half. So how does the albatross know where to soar toward?
There does seem to be this really large gap in information that they're able to access.
A clue came in a chance encounter on the way to the Crozet Islands, part of the French Southern and Antarctic territories, where Samantha was headed to study albatrosses.
On the same vessel were some researchers from the UN, and they were going to work with the hydrophone station that's used there. And that hydrophone station is used to monitor nuclear tests, and it also gathers infrasound data, like the data that we had freely available to us. And we came up with the question of whether seabirds could use infrasound. And it was clear that no one had really thought about this before or looked into it before, and that's where the idea for the project came from.
Infrasound is any sound below 20 hertz, where human hearing starts to drop off. At the very low end of the infrasound spectrum are microbaroms, very low frequency sounds between 0.1 and 0.6 hertz that are detectable across thousands of miles.
Microbaroms are generated by the collision of ocean waves.
Natasha Gillies is a seabird ecologist at the University of Liverpool and a co-author of the study. The constant hum of microbarom infrasound is called the voice of the sea. It's present everywhere, all the time, but it's unevenly distributed.
Where you have more energy in the ocean system because you have wavier areas or windy areas, then you get louder microbarom regions.
Ideal soaring conditions for wandering albatrosses.
But it also gives them information about standing ocean waves. And this is often caused by things like storms. So it would enable birds to try and gauge where storms are, potentially. And so this might be because they want to move towards windier areas that could be optimal, or they might want to move away from windy areas if they're too strong and they want to try and avoid storms.
Directly testing this apex predator's hearing is not an option. So Natasha and her colleagues arrived at a creative experimental solution. Get a large enough sample of wandering albatross flight paths, then, using wind and infrasound data, create a sound map of the total flight area, a map of microbaroms across space and time. Send out another set of albatrosses equipped with sensors to field check the sound map, and finally overlay the bird's flight paths on the sound map.
So essentially what we can get is if you put an albatross at point X in space and on this day and time, what infrasound would it be likely to hear and experience?
We didn't have an expectation at the beginning that they would move towards louder or quieter areas.
What the team found is that wandering albatrosses aren't exactly wandering. Instead, they seem to use microbaroms to head toward ideal wind conditions.
Looking at the soundscape and how the birds move, almost following this wave of sound. I found that beautiful. My name is Francesco Ventura, and I'm a postdoc at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
He wasn't involved in the study either.
It's another world. That's the thing. It's something that we cannot fully understand, I think, because we are humans and we cannot even imagine how that would work for us. But it seemed to be working fine for them because they've been doing it for a long time. They seem to be able of reading what's going on and of kind of orienting towards that. That's something that is it's sci-fi.
We know that there is something about infrasound that they want to move towards, that they like, that is beneficial to them in some way.
It was kind of a badly needed paper at this point because it sheds some new light into a fundamental question that is at the core of a lot of marine megafauna research in general, but also at the core of seabird research, which is how do they manage to find food in such a vast area?
This reliance on infrasound may actually extend to other species too.
Most seabirds are highly dependent on wind for movement. It seems to be involved in animal behavior in a lot of contexts and a lot of different species.
They include whales, elephants, pigeons, and peacocks.
So I would be very surprised if this was in any way unique to wandering albatrosses.
So albatrosses had a very long time to evolve ways of feeling the environment, lots of ways they can perceive what's around them. And I think because they really need this condition, this stormy condition, these winds, and so on, it makes perfect sense that they would have evolved more than one way of finding them.
I think it's a really nice reminder of the different sources of information animals might be using, especially in this sort of environment that is so featureless, and how animals can still extract so much information and context out of that, despite there seemingly not being much there.
Evolution in animals is almost always very surprising. When we study evolution and when you study animal closely, you find remarkable things, remarkable inventions.
Science Quickly is produced by Tulika Bose and Jeff Delvecchio. Our music is composed by Dominic Smith. Subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, give us a rating or review. For Science Quickly, I'm Joseph Polidoro.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Do people confess to crimes they didn't commit? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. It certainly sounds counterintuitive, but false confessions happen far more often than you'd suspect. Take, for example, the case of Andrew Royer, who, in 2005, was convicted of a strangulation homicide and sentenced to 55 years in prison. There was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime, and so his confession was a vital part of the case against him. The problems with the confession? Mr. Royer was particularly susceptible to being manipulated by the interrogating officer because he is developmentally disabled. And the interrogation stretched over 2 days. And Mr. Royer could not relate any of the details of the crime because he had no involvement, and so the police officer supplied those details and then stated that they came from Mr. Royer, which they didn't. As the Indiana Appellate Court put it, the investigating officer simply withheld the truth, resulting in Mr. Royer spending 16 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. 16 years later, the truth came out. And the city of Elkhart, Indiana, apparently has no question about the police misconduct and settled with Mr. Royer for the trauma of his wrongful conviction and 16 years in prison that he can't get back for $11.7 million. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. In December 2023, a federal court threw out state redistricting maps for Greater Detroit, drawn by the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, or MICRC. Truly independent redistricting is the gold standard, so what happened? The 3-judge panel found that 13 state legislature voting districts had been racially diluted by the 13-member Citizen Commission, making it harder for a black majority-minority district to elect a candidate of its choice as stipulated by the Voting Rights Act, Section 2. MICRC members are randomly chosen from a pool of applicants to minimize partisan manipulation, but the court found that member inexperience meant reliance on experts for guidance to balance communities of interest and requirements of the Voting Rights Act. Those experts suggested the commission merge some of the primarily black and less affluent Detroit districts with primarily white and highly affluent suburbs of Grosse Pointe, Bloomfield Hills, and Birmingham. Also curious, it was a Republican group which hired a Republican former state solicitor general to file the case. Republican AGs have openly defied Voting Rights Act rules in other states. The Michigan Advance reports that January 8th, the court directed that new maps be drawn by February 2nd. On January 11th, the MICRC appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court asking for the existing maps to stay in place. Find more on this evolving story at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1909. That was the day the United States Supreme Court decided the case Moyers versus Peabody. The case grew out of the Colorado Labor Wars, a series of back-to-back strikes in 1903 and 1904 in the precious metals mines and ore mills. The Colorado National Guard meted out violent assaults, arrests, and deportations against strikers, often on orders from Colorado Governor James Peabody. The state militia routinely rounded up strikers and union leaders, detained them for weeks in bullpens, and ignored their habeas corpus petitions. Western Federation of Miners President Charles Moyer arrived in Telluride during a strike to find these repressive conditions. He signed a poster that read, "Is Colorado in America?" The poster included an image listing the many violations of basic democratic rights on the American flag. Moyer was arrested in March of 1904 for desecration of the American flag on the poster. He was detained on the grounds of military necessity, even after the courts ordered his release. His case traveled through the state and federal courts until the Supreme Court ruled. They held that the governor and officers of a state National Guard, acting in good faith and under authority of law, may imprison without probable cause a citizen of the United States in times of insurrection and deny that citizen the right of habeas corpus. The ruling radicalized the labor movement. Many concluded there could be no justice through the court system. A later case successfully challenged the ruling on the basis that the claims of insurrection were subject to judicial review. The ruling, however controversial, still stands today and was invoked after 9/11 in the 2004 ruling Hamdi versus Rumsfeld. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 45 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low 50s. Rain throughout the day and will remain cloudy later on this afternoon, with rain tapering off, of course. Looks like we're going to get about a half an inch until then, and then cloudy overnight with lows in the low 40s, winds light and variable, and then overcast tomorrow with highs in the mid 50s. Could be a little warmer here at the mothership. Winds will be light and variable, and then it looks like we're going to have 7 days or more of rain with not less than a quarter inch like I said, for the next 7 to 10 days, starting on Saturday, of course. So it doesn't look like the lows are going to be low enough overnight to make snow, but we would like to have snow in the elevations, making snowpack for later use. Looks like pollen is still rated as none here in our little hamlet of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 27 parts per million, and that daytime UV index continues in its winter low range at level 1. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.06 inches. Visibility is at 6 miles. And relative humidity is at 97%. Oh boy. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 37 degrees and fair. Paris is 36 degrees and sunny with a potential disruption due to freezing. Rome is 61 and partly cloudy with a disruption due to heavy rain. Bagram is 35 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 37 degrees with light rain. Hong Kong is 67 and fair. Tokyo is 50 degrees and mostly cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 61 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and mostly cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 22 degrees, mostly cloudy with a disruption due to freezing temperatures, so take care. And New York, New York is 30 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Highly esteemed Edith M. Lederer of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Russia's intense missile and drone attacks across Ukraine in recent weeks sharply increased civilian casualties in December, with over 100 killed and nearly 500 injured, the UN said in a new report. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine said there was a 26.5% increase in civilian casualties last month, from 468 in November to 592 in December, with some reports still pending verification. It said the increase was likely higher. Danielle Bell, who has the UN's monitoring mission, said civilian casualties had been steadily decreasing in 2023, but the waves of attack in late December and early January violently interrupted that trend. The UN mission said it is verifying reports the recent intense Russian missile and drone attacks that began hitting populated areas across Ukraine on December 29th and continued into early January killed 86 civilians and injured 416 others. The UN monitoring mission said the highest number of casualties occurred during attacks on December 29th and January 2nd amid plummeting winter temperatures. On January 4th, it said Russian missiles struck the small town of Pokrovsk and nearby village of Rivne, close to the front lines, burying 2 families that included 6 adults and 5 children in the rubble of their homes. Some bodies have still not been found, it said. In another attack on January 6th, the blast wave from a Russian missile strike in Novomoskovsk injured 31 civilians, including 8 passengers on a minibus that was destroyed during the morning commute.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Sofeng Cheng of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A court in Cambodia convicted 4 land rights activists of plotting to provoke a peasant revolution by teaching farmers about class divisions, and then gave them 5-year suspended prison terms. The 4 were arrested and charged in May last year by a provincial court in northeastern Cambodia. They were charged with plotting against the state and incitement to commit a felony for teaching about the class differences between rich and poor. The arrests took place ahead of last year's general election that critics said was manipulated to ensure the return to power of the governing Cambodian People's Party and the then Prime Minister Hun Sen, who led the country for 38 years with little tolerance for dissent. His son, Hun Manet, took over as Prime Minister in August. The four activists had been arrested on May 17th after hosting a workshop about land rights and other issues affecting farmers. The police detained 17 of the workshop's 39 participants, but quickly released all but the four, who were briefly placed in pre-trial detention before being released on bail. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.